First of all, I would like to introduce you to Catherine. She is a campaign researcher and somebody that I have had the privilege of working with for several years. And I will let her introduce herself, but we'll turn it over to you, Catherine.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to start just by setting up, sharing my screen and everything. Um, just to get through that section of things because it's been a minute since I've done this. Um,
As a reminder, if you have questions during her presentation, go ahead and throw them in the chat. And then at the end, we'll be able to answer those questions.
okay. Share. Perfect. Um, allow. Okay, Carrie Ann, is everything good? Can you see it? Cool. I don't want to be one of those people that starts presenting and doesn't
It
notice.
looks like it needs to go into presentation
Presenter
mode, but other than
mode.
that, you're good.
Yeah. Perfect. Ah, so many little things opening. And while I do this, I'll just start kind of giving you a rundown on myself. My name is Catherine, and my background actually with research started at the Cat Center. So I'm super, super happy to be able to come here and present with all of you. Um, because this is kind of where I got my starting and where I did all my groundwork. I developed my skills at the Cat Center before I even, oh my gosh, where's the click present button?
Up in the corner, it says slideshow, on the right-hand side, where by share, and you should be able to just click on slideshow.
Boom. Sorry, guys. Good morning.
They're
Okay.
also different.
That has been updated since I was in college at the very least. So, my name is Catherine, and I first started doing research at the Cat Center, which is why I'm so glad to be able to present for Ready to Run today on the research I've been doing since then. So, at the Cat Center, I was doing research before I even knew that I wanted to study political science or go into research, and I got to keep doing it for 3.5 years, looking at the experiences of women running for office. And then also, while I was in college, I did an internship with a political action committee called Emily's List during the 2022 midterm elections, and I was vetting candidates to look for potential endorsement. And then since then, my research has looked a little different because I spent the past year and a half working on a Senate campaign in Nevada, and I'm here to talk most specifically about that experience. Okay, that's my quick little rundown. Um, so, in this presentation, I am going to go over the two main areas of campaign political research, which is self and opposition. And then there's not always resources in a campaign. Like I was on a big statewide campaign, so there were a lot of resources to do research in-house, but that's not always an option. So I'm going to go over some of the other sources that might be used or accessible for research if you don't have those abilities. And then also I'll talk a little bit about campaign life because it's so fun and such like a unique and special experience. And then I'll wrap up by answering any questions you guys might have. All right. Okay. The two main buckets of campaign research are self and opposition, and they're very, very similar, but you go through them kind of with a different perspective and a different angle. So, I'm going to start with the self, the positive stuff, kind of protecting your candidate, and then we'll dive into opposition. So, self research is research that you do on your principal, your candidate, and there are multiple different areas you want to hit. In research, we are in the business of defining people. We work very, very closely with the comms departments to be like pitching stories and ideas, what you want to be said at pressers, stories that like, oh, maybe this journalist should like look into diving into this section. So these are kind of main areas that we want to hit just to protect our candidate and build up their narrative. So just for starters, candidate achievements and or their platform. I worked for an incumbent, so we were able to check what she had set out to achieve versus achieved during her time in office, right? looking at things that you're able to like bring home to your constituents and say like, I did this, this, and this for you. I voted on this bill for you. I worked on delivering for veterans in this way. Um, how they've how they have delivered for their constituents in the past. And then if you're a new candidate or an incumbent, another important thing is to dive into your platform, what kind of things you're going to be voting on, watching in real time bills that might be introduced that you can say, I would vote this way on this. Like, this is how I would look if I was in office. Yeah. So that's kind of your baseline platform, establishing yourself, staying current with what's going on in the news to keep yourself up to date, and like show what kind of a representative you would be. The next area, which is kind of a major section of research, is your candidate vulnerabilities. You want to be able to recognize potential attacks that your principal might face and prepare your team for those attacks, right? You want to have responses kind of ready to go and know which way you want to take that. So there's a couple areas of a person's life that you want to check to make sure you're clean and good for tax. I mean, likely everyone's going to face some criticism through a campaign and probably should, so that you're ready to be the best representative possible. So some areas to check just to make sure everything's all smooth, you're all prepared, is just looking through their personal life. Like, how did this person make their money? What kind of stocks do they have? Make sure their finances are in order. Those are really, really common if you think about like things you've seen in the news a lot of times about a candidate will be like, oh, they bought this stock at this time, and like we're protecting their own pocket rather than protecting their people. So that's a very simple area. And then also understanding your policy issues that might be attacked. And how you've maybe shifted on the issues, things like abortion. Did you previously support this abortion bill, but now you're more accepting towards abortion? Or with police, like, were you previously calling to defund the police, but now you're for the police? Stuff like that, where you just want to kind of have built your narrative yourself before someone else can build that narrative for you. The next little area is vetting. This is what I had experience doing previously on my internship, and it looked a little bit different than it does in a campaign, because the vetting on a campaign is much more focused in making sure anyone associated with it furthers the candidate message and doesn't take away from it or differs from the candidate's stances, basically. So if you have the capacity, you would want to check for a variety of levels with vets. You'd look at fundraiser hosts, anyone that is hosting something for your candidate. Do they further their messaging? You look at if you're working with influencers, which I think is becoming more and more common in politics, especially as digital grows. Are these influencers people that kind of not necessarily echo, but like say similar things and don't take, like, you wouldn't be like, oh, this person really, really is different on like key issues going on in the world today that differ from this candidate's stance. People that you would use in advertisements or direct to cameras, you want to make sure that they align with your candidate, because they're really going out and being spokespersons, right? Anyone that might appear in a presser at a press conference, and then also staff needs to obviously line up with your candidate. In doing this, you're kind of determining earned media risk, looking at this, especially for like influencers. Does this influencer, like, how similar are they to your candidate stances? And also, how big is their base, right? Like, is it worth maybe taking a hit or two to get outreach to like 300K people in your state, something like that. I love the vetting process. I think it's very fun. And I'm like private on everything because you can learn so much about a person. It's crazy. The next area of self kind of goes with vetting, and it is the approvals process. It's just making sure that everything is factual and accurate. You are working really, really closely with other departments when you're in research. I already brought up comms, I've brought up influencers and the digital side, and it's just making sure that everything that those two teams are putting out into the world for people to see um, are real, factual, accurate. You're not stretching the truth or anything. Um, and then also research backs up any advertisements that might go out, right? If you're sending out a mailer or you're running an ad on Facebook or running an ad on the TV, you want to make sure that what's being said can be backed up with research. Um, and then finally, just keeping a pulse on everything is so important. And that is what we see in media monitoring. We are watching what is being said about the race. How is the news or people on social media talking about it? You're checking mentions on the TV, on news articles, on all social media, just to be like, what's the takeaway about the race? Like, how can we respond to people? What's being put out there? So that's kind of the realm of self-research. I feel like I've given you guys a ton of information. It's only going to continue. But that's what self-research looks like, is kind of building up your candidate, right? Building up their platform and defining them in that way, preparing for potential responses from their vulnerabilities. And then the last three kind of go together for benefiting the campaign as a whole and making sure that nothing putting out there takes away from your candidate's achievements and their platform. Okay. Um, on to the next session. We're looking at what opposition research looks like, which is a major part of political research, is digging into the opposition. So it's a similar methodology through a different lens. As I mentioned earlier, in research and in campaigns, you want to define candidates. And not only are you defining yourself before anyone else can define you, but you also ideally are able to define the opposition before they're defining themselves, right? Kind of a race in that way. So a major part of this is knowing the opposition like you would know your candidate. And you kind of become the point person on the campaign for this, which I always think is really fun when someone is able to turn to you and you're like, oh, yeah, I know like this part of this person's life. I can tell you what was happening in this year. Um, so in opposition research, a big part is creating hits and looking at what kind of stories you want to run. If your team has the capacity, a lot of the things you would do for your candidate, you would also do for the opposition. This includes looking at the opposition's achievements and their goals. So you want to know like what they're setting out to do and what the impact of what they're setting out to do is, right? Like how would they vote on this bill? What is the like economic impact of this bill? What are they saying that they would do and how would it affect the people in your state? How would it affect Iowans? Something like that. And then you also want to understand their vulnerabilities because that is where you can get a story out of. You also, if you have the capacity, it would be great to vet the people involved in interacting with that campaign. You can think about stories right now with like the staffers for Doge have been talked about a lot in the news recently. And that's kind of an example of like looking at a staff and being like, oh, these are the kind of people that we have running this campaign over here. And then also watching the media about that person. So that's a really quick rundown of ways that it is similar to opposition research, to self-research. Um, Also, you're going to be diving very deeply into this candidate's background. Is the opposition who they say they are? What have they done or achieved in their life to this point? And can we verify all of that? Opposition research uses a lot of public record requests to be like, this business that they worked at, that happened. Like, that's true. We can verify their employment there. We want to understand how they made their money. You know, are they from a very wealthy family or all the different pieces? It's very fun. Um, and then that's also kind of similar to what you would do with the candidate side. Field research, we're looking at, it's also commonly called tracking a lot. Both sides do it. And what you're doing is ideally attending events to understand how the opposition is talking to their base about the issues. Because sometimes you're more moderate up front in front of everybody. And then when you're just talking to a small group, um, you go off the cuff a little bit more, maybe switch up your positions a little bit. And that's really, really important for the general public to understand if you're doing that, because maybe what you're saying in this case is actually your stance on the issue rather than what you've been saying to the general public. So field research is a really important part of campaigns. It is a major way to keep a pulse on what's going on too, which kind of dives into the staying current part. We want to continue to know what the candidate is doing. What kind of events are they hosting? What kind of fundraisers are they running? Are they doing what they're saying? An example of this outside of just like monitoring the media would be watching what donations they're receiving and looking at like if it's a statewide, the Federal Election Commission, or state level contribution reports, if it's not, to be like, oh, they accepted money from like these people associated with this business. A common hit last cycle would have been these people that are associated with like Project 2025 or something like that, and where the ties in there are. So it's kind of a quick rundown of the opposition side. It is a lot of information, I know, but it's very, very similar to what you would do for your candidate. You're just looking through a different lens when you're doing it. You're thinking like, how can we define them, and what are some areas that we can get like stories out? You want to like tell people the truth, and that's why research is really, really important in a campaign. Another really fun side of opposition research is also understanding the state that you're in. Different states have different hot button issues, and different things are successful in those different states. So in a state like Iowa, you would be more concerned about the impacts on agriculture and the farming community than you would be in some other states. How does the opposition touch on issues that really impact the people that are essential to your state? And that was like a really fun part for me living out in Nevada, to learn like what issues are really, really important to Nevadans. And in that time, you become like fully associated with that state. So, you're a person living there and paying taxes there, and you care about the development of that state. So that's a fun side of research too, I think, and just campaigns in general. So other sources for research, as I said earlier, I was working on a Senate campaign, so it was a like well-funded statewide. We were able to do a lot of in-house research. But there are other people that do research. And I think that's really important to know if you're looking at running a campaign on any level. Other statewide campaigns use consultants, and other campaigns that would be running like congressional races and anything on the ladder, running for state house would use consultants. There are consultants that exist, really, really like large consultant shops. And then there's also people that do research work like in each state. Like I got to know the person that did research on his own as an individual in Nevada. So consultants are super important to know. And another area is campaign committees. There are campaign committees for pretty much every level of race with researchers. These are typically based out of DC, and they would be helping. There's a Senate committee, congressional, gubernatorial. There are Secretary of State ones. So that's another area that you could find researchers. And then also state parties. A lot of times state parties will hire researchers, and they could be helping out with people within their party. Also, if you don't know of consultants, reaching out to your network and your state party can help you like find the sources that you need to find in order to do that. Also, political action committees do research. When you think about like Emily's List, there are researchers there. And then outside groups at the same time are doing research. People associated with outside groups are not able to talk to campaigns. So when you think about independent expenditures and super PACs, they would be doing their own research and potentially running their own ads, but there cannot be any collaboration or talking at all between the two groups lining up. So those are some places that you can look for to do research. Next, I'm going to talk about life on a statewide campaign. As you can see maybe by the picture, I most recently lived in Vegas, which was such an interesting place out of college to be like, I'm gonna move to, as someone who had never been there. But it was very fun. And I love working on campaigns. I want to continue to do it. So when I think about campaign life, the first thing I think is work hard, play hard. It is not easy work. It is very, very time consuming. As election day nears, you'll be working long hours, 12-hour days, often 7 days a week. Weekends don't matter at a certain point. And you'll like check social media and be like, I didn't know it was Saturday. And at a certain point, specifically with research, like the research ends, right? Like you're staying current, but you don't need everyone to be watching everything. Um, and like the narrative is built, the ads are out the door, they're backed up, everything's ready to go. And so I really, for the last like month and a half, was doing get out the vote. I was attending press events, filling in wherever I could. I got to drive surrogates, which was really fun. And I drove a 15 passenger van for the first time of people that were trying to get out the vote. So you're really showing like a willingness to jump into anything at any given time. And that work is also hard work. Um, but also it's super rewarding. Just the idea that there is an end result. Somebody is going to come out on top. And then the craziest thing of all happens, which is the race ends. And you go from working all hours 7 days a week to truly being done. And like packing up the office and moving on, which is a very, very weird feeling, but it's like the reality of it. Um, and it's rewarding in that way too, because you've been working so hard and you're like, whew. It's called, we're through it. Um, the other side of a campaign that I really love, and I think maybe it's because I grew up playing sports, though I wasn't amazing at them, is that there is a team atmosphere. You are all working together towards a common goal, and you get to meet like-minded people that kind of care about the same things as you do. You have similar values. Um, and then I have learned that I really love the opportunity to live somewhere new. Iowa will always be home to me. It is a very comforting place. But it was really cool to have the experience of living in a new state, in a new city. And yeah, you really become ingrained with where you're living, which I had mentioned earlier, when talking about the opposition that like you understand the state that you're living in. And a lot of people will work campaigns somewhere and stay there because it just kind of becomes a new home to them. Or it's always an honor to like get to work in your home state and experience that. So that's kind of a quick rundown of what life on a campaign looks like. I'm sure a lot of you in this have experienced that in some capacity or are hoping to. So yeah, it's super fun. And super hard work, and it all pays off in the end, even in the toughest moments. And then here are my Vegas pictures. I am open to take any and all questions people might have. Hopefully, I can answer them and like have something to add for everyone. So,
So you're welcome to put your questions in the chat. You are also welcome to ask them out loud if you have something right off the top of your head. I wanted to ask a specific question that came up because it's going to come up later today as well. But I know a lot of people are like totally wigged out that like, what about something that I did when I was 20? So how did you and how did they overcome some of those past issues that maybe you're a lot smarter now and you need to be able to say something about that?
well, my candidate is lucky because she didn't have social media when she was 20, right? So like that's not all showed. But if I were in a boat like that, I think that would be an area of like candidate vulnerabilities that you just have to be prepared to respond to. Like it doesn't mean you can't run, right? We need more people to run for office, that like care to represent their constituents, but it's just one of those areas that like you'll want to be prepared to like work with your communications team to build up a response. If you haven't run yet, like never hurts to delete things from your social media. Of course, knowing that it was ever out there is helpful, but
I'm very excited to have our next two panelists here to talk about how to build a team. And I think that that's a huge part of getting started. And so some of the questions that y'all had about getting started, this will be a good place for that. As a reminder, while we're chatting, go ahead and put your any questions you have in the chat. And then at the end, we'll give you time if you want to talk out loud. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. We're so glad to have you. I'm going to ask questions and just take turns who answers first. But to start off, let's start with Sarah. And please tell me about your experience in politics, including like what offices you've run for and times you were part of teams.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me participate today. I have a very unique view in that it's a very local election race. I have been mayor in Pleasant Hill now for 12 years, and I'm ramping up the campaign this year for re-election year, 4 more years of service, hopefully. And then end of 2018, 2019, I did run for Polk County Board of Supervisor. And then we all know what happened in 2020, and I was in a primary, and that was not successful. So I've learned a lot on both that race and as well as my mayoral campaigns. So that is the extent of it in a quick and dirty version.
Okay,
Awesome.
Melissa.
You want me to jump in? Okay. So I'm Melissa Vine, and my background is I've never intended to get into politics. I was a therapist and social worker and ran a nonprofit, and did some public speaking as well, about my own story. And then who became my campaign manager had heard me speak at an event and was really pushing for me to run for United States Congress in this last election. And I was very hesitant with the timing. I was working full time and I was a full-time law student at Drake. But my kids were the ones that were really pushing me to do it. And so, and also I was very passionate about some of the issues that were at hand, in that election cycle. And so I decided to, go ahead and run. And as we get more into the questions, we'll hear I'm here as an example of what not to do. So, not in every capacity, but especially as we're talking about some team issues. And so I'll be happy and open to share that as we get further into this. But yes, so my only run for office was for District 3 in Iowa, and I lost in the primary in June of last year.
I really appreciate all of that from both of you. Research has shown that women have to be asked lots of times to run, and so that's a really good story. And it's really important to know that you have to run more than once to be successful sometimes. So great. My next question is that it takes some time to build a good team. And so how did you identify good networks to be a part of? And are there organizations you would recommend people be a part of to find good team members? And we'll start with Sarah we'll start with Melissa this time.
So, of course, I'll be speaking at a federal level, and this is going to look different from local and state, county, and those kinds of things. It's a little bit like the Wild Wild West, right? If you think about times that you've applied for a job, right? You get some kind of education or training, you apply for a job. It's a very formal process. You know who's in charge and how it's going to work and what the terms are. And getting involved in politics is, I mean, even as Mrs. Pence mentioned before we got on here, right? Like there's just people and organizations everywhere, right? And trying to figure out how to navigate that can be a little bit overwhelming. I had no idea what was going on behind the curtain. So at a federal level, the team that you're building is going to involve consultants for the major types of products that you will need. And so you're going to have a consultant who does your media, who helps to create your TV commercials, radio ads. You've got a consultant who's going to do your print materials. You've got a consultant who's going to do your social media website, that kind of thing. And so, and then, and a consultant for your polling. Those are kind of the big ones. Now, these consultants are all over the country and they've worked on races, so they maybe have varying levels of familiarity with your particular seat and your race. And so one thing as I was interviewing, now I will say my national team was phenomenal. They actually, half of my team was on Obama's campaign team, like sat in the room with him to make his commercials with him. So like I had amazing, very talented people at a national level on my team. But it was the most random way that you kind of get into the process. You sign this contract, you meet on a Zoom call once a week, and all these consultants are working together on your campaign. Now, some of them have worked together on other campaigns. Some of them have worked against each other in other campaigns. And so putting that team together when I didn't really know a lot of the people, and most candidates at that point don't, it was a little bit like, felt a little bit like a gamble, like, right? Like, is this team going to gel? And so for me as a female candidate, I wanted a strong female voice in my team. So my team was primarily female, but I also wanted to have male voices on there too. So we did have, my campaign manager was male, and then one of our national team was male as well. And so the team, and also the thing that's strange is they're getting paid a commission on the product that they provide. So some people on my national team never got paid because they were like, if they did mailers, well, we didn't have money to do mailers. We put all of our money into TV. So if I would have won the primary, of course they would have made, so they either make buku bucks, like hundreds of thousands of dollars on a successful campaign, or they make nothing. And they can work with you for, over a year, right? So it's a very interesting field. And you might have a consultant who's your mailer, who does your mailers and has no graphic design experience, no marketing experience, but they're a really good political consultant. And this is very common. The product they provide is not actually their area of expertise in a lot of ways, not always, but sometimes. But the consulting that they provide, when you have those meetings as far as how to navigate your campaign, those pieces, that's their area of expertise. So the product is really kind of a way for them to get paid. But the consulting expertise is what they're really providing. Locally, I just had my campaign manager, and he's the one who had approached me about running for office. I had no idea like how this all works, especially at a federal level. And he came with a good reputation. He had some stamps of approval at a national level. I had known him for a couple of years, and he'd been a supporter of the nonprofit that I ran. And so so I did trust him. He was also offering me a really good deal because he knew I was going up against an establishment candidate. And he said, you don't have to pay me unless you win this primary. And so that's something that's unheard of really for a campaign manager, but he was in a position financially where he could do that. He really believed in me as a candidate and in the campaign. I will give him credit and gratitude for that. And so he just kind of took a leap with me. And but also, if you're not paying someone, it's a little trickier to get certain things done or what you need done. You don't feel like you have as much agency, over the campaign or how that's going. So that can get a little bit tricky. There's more to say, but I'll give Sarah some time.
But those are really important things to recognize. And the consultants are typically not involved in local elections. They can be if you have the money and you really want them to manage your social media and your website. But for me, especially when I started over 12 years ago, it was never my intention to get involved in running a race. My mother's now a retired nurse. My dad's a retired mechanic. It's just not in our family anywhere. And so when the former mayor, who was the mayor at the time, asked me to come meet with him, I thought I had done something wrong at a plan and zoning meeting. And he said he was not running again and really wanted me to run. And so I, not knowing what to do, really leaned on him first. He was filling a former of the mayor before him term. He had been naughty, so somebody had to step in. and not knowing a majority of the community where we're still new here. I had a 3-year-old and almost 1-year-old at the time. And so it was really about learning how to very quickly say, who do you know? Who can you introduce me to? Who do I need to talk to at the end of every single meeting? And I also learned very quickly that there are a lot of people who do not ever want to run, but want to give you money to run. And I'm sure we'll talk about money later. But I leaned into that really hard. And it will make you a very successful candidate. You just have to get over that fear of asking or the uncomfortableness of it. But in building a really good team and a team I could trust, I also have what I call a personal board of directors. And if you don't have one, I really recommend you do that. And my personal board of directors fluctuates between 8 to 10 people. They're all completely different demographics, different political party, different age, different gender, different religious background, different life experiences, different careers. And they all, and I know 100% that they have my best interests in mind. And so they're also a group of people that I could go to when I was trying to build a team to say, I'm looking for somebody to manage my finances. Who do you know? I'm looking for this, or this person wants to get involved in my campaign. Do you know them? It looks like you do on social media. And so even outside of that, just having outside of your campaign, having your own personal board of directors helps you through policy decisions, through life decisions, through career decisions. I just can't recommend that group enough. And then just constantly asking people and getting reference checks. I am a person, I do this for anyone applying for jobs at my full-time place of employment where I work at the city. I dig and dig and dig until I find references that are not on the resume or not on the job application. That takes work, but it will pay off in the end. And then I give a tremendous amount of trust. I don't have an option to not. And so until I get burned, they have my full trust. So you just have to decide how you're going to operate, and having that full trust will also help you make decisions. And I know we're going to talk about delegating. It just builds on that and helps you work a lot more quickly.
I really like that. I'm going to switch to the next question just a little, because there are a couple people, participants that are like barely starting to think about campaigns. So what team roles did you try and fill first? And was there a way that you were trying to like strengthen your own weak spots? And we'll start with Sarah this time.
Okay, so for me, I really needed somebody to help manage the Iowa Ethics campaign submittals. It's just constant paperwork, and I never wanted to screw that up. So making sure that I could find somebody who's been involved on another campaign who could handle that for me, that just takes a lot out of your brain. And since it's such public documentation, I did not want to risk missing that. And then 2, who could manage the checkbook? And looking for somebody, I found a friend in finance who was like, oh yeah, easy, I will run that for you. And so they became a co-signer on my campaign account so they could pull it from the bank, statements, etc. And then I had a thank you note chair. Having somebody write thank you notes for you is really helpful. And those go a really long way. I can't stress that enough. And I'm very lucky that when I ran, and my parents and my in-laws are still with us, they were very helpful in driving me around. I tell women never door knock by yourself. And so I always made sure they were like my unofficial like driver, door knocker leaders. So not an actual like chair on a local campaign, but always making sure that they either found somebody to drive me or go with me. So I wasn't spending time trying to find those people. And I will call out to be really efficient with door knocking. And I don't know if they probably have this at the federal level. There's not an app through either party at the local level. I found like a cheap delivery app that was like 99 cents, and I would upload the addresses from an Excel spreadsheet. So I wasn't like driving like 4 blocks and 6 blocks over, and it puts it in an efficient delivery method. So then whoever was driving with me, they had the listing, they managed the app, and it made us very efficient. There you go.
Okay.
Melissa?
I love it. Yes. So, and then again, at federal level, a little different, like what you're having to do. So you don't do as much, at least in the primary. I didn't personally do much door knocking. Now, everything I had my volunteers do, I did myself at some point, just because I wanted them to, I wanted to know what I was asking them to do and to be for them to know I was in it with them. But some of the one of the biggest things when you're running for federal office is to actually get on the ballot. So you have to have, we did a few extra just to make sure in case any of them were not accurate. We did 60 signatures in 13 counties. Now, this is a huge project, and we had volunteers helping, but when you're covering a fourth of the state, and you've got volunteers helping, I did end up having to do a lot of that myself too, and my campaign manager. And I mean, excuse my language, but you're eating shit sandwiches. I mean, you really are. And a lot of the campaign you are. But I will say that part was the hardest. And as someone who, my party is Democratic, and rural Iowa, in some counties they're, very adversarial towards Democrats, and not throwing any shade, they're just saying the reality of that. And so I would get kicked out of Dollar Generals and grocery stores and apartment buildings and yelled at, and and I wasn't even asking for people's vote. I was just like, hey, can you just sign this so I can get on the ballot? And so, but once, if I got to engage with people and they knew, I'm a mental health counselor, I'm really passionate about increasing mental health for rural Iowa, and we found points of connection, then they were like, hey, I'm a Republican, but I believe in the things that you stand for, and I like who you are, I like your story, right? And so I don't know if they ended up voting, but like it was like we can build connections with each other. And I mean, of course, there's a whole conversation in politics around the polarization that is making it harder for us to talk across parties. And so that was something I really was passionate about. And one of the reasons I ran is hey, we need to be able to have conversations with each other, because we have so much more in common than these binary, systems that the media would like us to think that we exist within, right? And so, I'm getting off track. I have ADHD. I'm so sorry, but getting those signatures required a lot of volunteers, and I was going up against an establishment candidate. Now, I didn't know this when I got into the race, but at a federal level, there's something called Red to Blue. And if you get on that list, it's like you're a targeted race at a federal level. So you have a lot of funds that come into your campaign. What a lot of people don't know, though, is whoever wins the primary gets those funds after the primary. So, but you can spend some in the primary too. You also get free staffers that help with, like, several staffers that help with your campaign. So we were up against a candidate who had 10 times as much money as me. He had 12 times as many staffers as I did, right? It was me and my campaign manager, and we had about 100 volunteers. And so, it was very grassroots, and it was very like, hey, we're just going to roll up our sleeves and figure this out, right? And so we did have like different folks overseeing different roles, especially with the signatures. We had folks helping with thank you notes. We did some door knocking, mostly at the end. Door knocking is a little trickier when you've got like a giant, district of people. And so your main focus in a federal campaign is fundraising, and that you spend about 40 hours a week just making phone calls and meeting with people and asking for money. So I will say, like, I thought running for office was, connecting with people, sharing our passion for our country, like these things that were a part of the campaign, but a very small sliver. The bulk of the campaign was fundraising. And so having the right people in place to help support that, my fundraising consultant was excellent. He basically would just be on my calls, giving me feedback. Before I would call someone, he would say, okay, this person's passionate about this, or they have a daughter, then they want to make sure their daughter stays in Iowa after she graduates. And so, talk about the importance of, building up Iowa so people stay after they graduate. So he would kind of prime me for the donors that I was calling. and then give me feedback on like, hey, here's a way you could do fundraising better, or you try this, or here's a policy answer. In fact, we have a chat going while I was on most of the calls. So if someone asked me a question and I wasn't quite sure how to answer it, he would type in the chat to help me out. Which was really helpful. And the goal in fundraising at a federal level is for every call to be an average of 6 minutes long. Now, I used to be a nonprofit director. I was used to fostering relationships for months or years. And then you ask for, $500,000, right? And you've primed them and you're ready and you get the big gift. To go into a space where I'm spending, okay, you got 6 minutes and then you got to ask them to write a check is like, okay. So it's like the speed dating version, and also like I would go have a coffee meeting with someone, an hour-long coffee meeting, and then they might donate $250, right? And so just the ROI is so different. The scale is so different than sales or fundraising when you're in that political space. And so having at a federal level, I think the most important position, the two most important positions are your campaign manager and that fundraising consultant. And mine was someone who grew up in Iowa, but also was now national and knew a lot of folks, both at a local level and nationally, and was connected in circles where people had a lot of money. And as much as you don't like to be like, well, it really, a lot of it is about having money to win the campaign, especially at a federal level, because you just can't conceivably door knock, the number of houses that you would have to. And so we ran our campaign very lean and mean. We spent almost no money. Other than like I had to pay a monthly bill so at a federal level, you use a compliance company that would oversee your finances and your compliance because it's a little more sticky and at a federal level. And so you've got to have a bigger company. So we paid them a monthly fee and I paid my fundraising consultant a monthly fee. But other than that, we spent almost like very little money, yard signs, a couple posters. But then we were just saving up. And so that when it came to time for TV commercials, we poured everything we could into those TV commercials because that is the most effective way to get, especially in a primary where a lot of folks that are voting in primaries are, in the 60 plus age range, still might be watching TV, might be home during the day watching TV. And so even though I don't watch TV, I was like, okay, this is what I'm saving all this money up for. And so I would say those two components would and I needed a stronger volunteer chair. The first one I had, some things happened with him personally, so he had to step down, and then someone else stepped in and she did a phenomenal job. But she came in, 2 or 3 weeks before the end. So we didn't have the advantage of her the whole time. She was very, very organized. But I would say your volunteer manager, in a role like mine where I had a lot of volunteer work needed, it was a really important role as well.
I want to ask a follow-up question, so either of you are welcome to answer it. Both of you have talked a little bit about volunteers, and volunteers are such a key part of the team that you build. Can you talk a little bit about managing volunteers and just that side of it?
Yeah, so for me, it's like having the biggest network you can, and I know Sarah and I are both people that we just know a lot of people, right? And you work in nonprofit, you get to know a lot of people that way too. So that made it a lot easier for me to get volunteers. So what I lacked in establishment power, I could kind of make up for, so my opponent had almost no volunteers, and I had about 100. So we were like, okay, we need to have these volunteers almost like do the work that like a paid staff person would do. So either way, if you have money for staff or you have a good network of people that would be good volunteers, I will say like, and even in working in nonprofit, just know that however many volunteers sign up, just know that it will be a smaller percentage of those folks who are genuinely committed and will continue to show up because people get really excited about volunteer opportunities. And we see this in nonprofit too. Like they have that rush of like feel good and they want to do something good. But people are so busy and stressed out right now. And so then sometimes when it came time for the action steps, just expect that you'll have less people show up. And if you have that expectation, you won't be disappointed. Just know you'll need need more than what you want. But figuring out what are the key components of your campaign. What helped us is in the beginning to have people sign up right away. Like name the exact things you need. Be as specific as you can. We need this many people on this day to to send postcards to this district, to this county, at this time, and sign up on this sign up sheet for exactly which thing you want to do, rather than just kind of a like, oh, who can help? Oh, who can come on Saturday? But get people committed to something specific right from the beginning when they're excited about it, and express a ton of gratitude because you are grateful. I mean, being a political volunteer is a lot of work. There's, not a huge payoff. You're really behind the scenes, and it is a ton of work. And so, yeah, just being very grateful and positive toward your volunteers is a really important way to thank them and keep them engaged. So.
And after any meeting and any interaction, of course, asking for money or how you can help, I would then document. I got really good voice to text. I can't recommend that enough. Just learn what app works best for you, because you can walk away from a door and be like, Melissa really said she cares about mental health. Here's her address. Make sure I follow up with her on this. And she said she wants a yard sign. And the ability to do that will streamline your work. And then additionally, I would just have an Excel spreadsheet that was shared with a couple of really close volunteers who would then reach out or deliver the sign or whatever it may be. I will tell you, the local level races, of course, are so different, but I would find local businesses that would be willing to host us for like thank you note writing or door knocking training or whatever needed to be. And they would donate and bring food to the volunteers because they like knew I wasn't going to pay for that, but they supported me. So that's how they would help. That's really only, I've only seen that really at local level elections, but that made the volunteers feel good. But I will tell you, when I ran for Polk County Board of Supervisor, we had an absentee ballot chair, and he built a group of volunteers who would either drive and pick up absentee ballots, make phone calls, and we were together as much as you could be in 2020, like spread out in a giant conference room, making phone calls, and we would schedule time together to do that. And so those volunteers, you need fierce people who are making absentee ballot phone calls and trying to get people to fill them out for you, and also really patient people, because there's such a tremendous amount of misinformation. When I was running for supervisor, there was a state legislator with the same name, Sarah, running. And so everybody was confusing us. And it was really funny. And we had to just spend a lot of time being like, oh no, if you saw that ad on TV, actually no, and that's not me. Or if you heard this on the radio, and these are the issues that a supervisor is involved with, not the state level. It was very funny, something I never anticipated coming across. But just finding those unique ways to make sure you're aligning tasks to talent, that's the best thing that you can do. I will tell you, as a young woman, when I was first running, I knew there was a predominant boys club who was super involved in a lot of city conversations and the politics in the city, not even red or blue, just the politics of a local community. And I asked for a meeting with them. And I was terrified that they were just going to laugh me off, and they all became my top volunteers, and they have stuck with me to this day, and some of them have passed away. But just really making sure that you are finding those leaders, and even if you think they're really busy, just make sure you're always asking them to do one thing for you. It doesn't matter what it is. And they'll tell you what they can do, whether they can volunteer at a larger level, or, hey, I can't have a sign in my yard because I'm in an HOA, but here are the 3 places that already got approval for you to deliver signs to, right? So don't let them off the hook.
Love it.
I love that. I also think that's such an important part, to not disregard somebody who you don't think will support you, because you might end up being lovely and wrong.
Yes. Yes.
That's a really great point. Okay, so campaigning is intense. What were your top strategies for keeping your team morale high when everything just feels overwhelming? And we will start with Melissa on this one.
So I tend to stay pretty positive most of the time. And so I think uh that I'm like wake up, I never have drank coffee. I wake up in the morning like this, like energized and smiling, and I have 4 teenage sons, and they're just like, oh mom, so that's actually something that comes very natural to me, is just to keep people pumped up and excited. um I will say the wheels fell off at the end. Do you want me to get into it right now? Or do you want
Yeah,
me?
I'll ask in a minute about what you would do differently, but
Okay, I'll save it then. Okay. But I think for me it was just functioning like a cheerleader, right? And if you've got we didn't get to this point, but if you've got a campaign office or a location, but just coming into the space with energy and excitement is important to your team, volunteers and staff, but then also have your people that behind the scenes, if you need to cry or be angry or have all the emotions that you need, that you have those support people in your life, to provide that kind of emotional support. But I will say, I mean, mine was, I was like a walking zombie. I mean, when I got into the campaign, they told me it would take, my campaign manager said it would be 20 to 25 hours a week. And I didn't know any different. I didn't know the extent of the fundraising calls and all of this that was going to be going on. It ended up being about 60 to 70 hours a week. And I was working 40 hours a week running a nonprofit, and I was in full-time law school. So I mean, I can't hardly even remember this time. Like it was a blur. And I'm a single mom of 4 kids. So thankfully they're older and they're really great kids. And they were super supportive and helpful. But yeah, it was definitely, I think I'm still kind of recovering from that. So,
And I would just share, especially on the supervisor race, challenging somebody in my own party because they weren't doing their job. That was a big hill to climb, and there are a lot of politics involved in that. But just by demonstrating you're there to do the work and doing what you said you would do, even though you're asking volunteers to do things, you're reiterating to them, hey, I mailed out these 30 thank you cards last night, and here's my door knock list from yesterday. Just sharing out the work you are doing helps others stay motivated. And, really going back to that personal board of directors, they would all check in. How are you doing? What do you need? How can we help? Keep going. You're doing great, because you will have really hard days. I had death threats during my supervisor race because I stood up against a bill like 2 years before then. That was a very unpopular position for me to take in my party. And so that all got re-elevated again during my primary. So you're going to have really hard days. And that's when you work very closely with your local police department. They're there for you. Anytime you get anything on social media or at a door, you do not hesitate. This is why you pay property taxes. You go directly to your police department. I try to repeat that over and over and over for anyone running for office, because there are some unfortunately scary people out there. But when you, I would just, when you have the hard days, just pause. Like, you can't be someone that, if you're showing at the door fake and you're not where Melissa can just naturally be every day, which is amazing. If we could bottle and sell it, we'd all be self-funding all of our campaigns. But you do have to carve out the time for you. Or if you just can share with your closest people, I just can't today, I will be back tomorrow, and just take the time and be off social media. And that's the biggest thing, is you should never run your own social media. You should approve messages that are being listed for you, but you should never run it. You should never read it, because the people who are with you are not commenting on your Facebook social media pages. It is just full of angry, uninformed, uninvolved people who will not door knock for you, probably won't show up to vote for anyone. And just clear that out of your brain and don't let it take up space, because you just will go down rabbit holes and question yourself. And it's not worth letting these people who have no idea your integrity, your worth, and the power of what the good things you're trying to do. Don't let them just have any headspace taken up and for you. Oops, are you on? Sorry, are you on mute? I'm so sorry. I can see
Nope.
you. Okay.
Thank you
I was
so
like, oh no.
This next one will start with Sarah, but it's both a positive and kind of a negative question. But what did you like the most about working with your campaign team? And is there anything you would do differently?
Having worked on just a local campaign, I loved how organic and natural and how much control you have over that. I did not like, especially running in Polk County for Polk County Board of Supervisors seat, how much political money I had federal consultants from all over the US trying to fight for this contract. And it was the weirdest experience for me. And I do believe that even though the county supervisor races in large counties, especially like Polk County, can be very contentious, it they bring a federal level lens that just is not real in local level races. And I believe they come with best intentions. And I was new to working with them. I let them lead on things based on data and polling that I would never have done again. It was not me. And that continued to just bother me. It wasn't like it was bad. It just wasn't demonstrating who I was as a candidate. And the people who even know me really well were like, gosh, I wish, like, spend your money on like the good things you've done, not these other things. And they would keep coming back with, here are the polls, here's what's going to get people to show up. And so that was a really big lesson learned. Again, it wasn't anything that I was like, oh, I would never do that again. It was just, I would understand and have the words from my local experience to be able to combat those conversations. And, you know, at that time, full-time employee for my full-time job, still operating as mayor, growing family, it is hard. And campaigning versus policy making are two completely different things. And I hate that about all of this. And I just share that very honestly and bluntly. You do feel like two completely different people, no matter how authentic in your best intentions when you are campaigning and policy making. And having the experience now, I lean into more opportunities that demonstrate the policy making when I can align it with campaigning activities or opportunities versus the strictly campaigning part, because I'm better at that and it aligns more with who I am and helps achieve the goals and gets the messages across that are really important to me. So those, I know that's not quite probably what you were looking for, but that's just because my experiences at the local level are so different than what Melissa's probably going to share next.
Actually, I could even piggyback on some of those things. Like it is, my campaign described it as you are a caricature. And so at a federal level, I would have never showed up on the Zoom if I was running with my hair not curled, right? They said, you decide what your look is going to be, and you need to look almost the same everywhere you go every day. So the way I did my makeup, the way I did my hair, the type of clothes. I wore a certain type of like a bodysuit, so it would always stay tucked in, so I had to mess with it, and a pencil skirt, and I had like a certain look that I had to, so I bought a bunch of clothes that looked exactly the same, just different colors. And because they said they don't remember you very well at this level, they don't see you very often, and so you need to look almost as similar as possible every time that they see you. And it, like I said, we hardly ever talked about like where I actually stood on issues or what I was actually passionate about when we were doing all the behind the scenes work. Like I said, it's mostly about fundraising. And when I met with Teresa Greenfield before I started running, she gave me a really good piece of advice. She said, running a campaign is like it's like a startup small business, which is something I've done before. So she's like, you're starting up a business and you're going to either succeed or fail when the election time comes, right? And so as I made decisions, like viewing this the same way I did when I was doing a startup, right? But like in this, like, you know, as Sarah was saying, it is really hard to be an authentic version of yourself because there are things that you're like, well, okay, I'm really passionate about, for example, criminal justice reform, right? Like I ran a nonprofit for women coming out of prison, and I think there's some changes that need to happen, and I have some ideas. And that's what I'd love to get on stage and talk all about. But there are very few voters that really think much about criminal justice reform, right? And so I didn't really get to talk as much about the things that were like, you know, as close to my heart, and then would have to make sure I spent enough time. And you're supposed to also repeat the same stump speech, almost the same words everywhere you go, so people see you as the same brand. There's not a lot of creativity to that, right? It's the same thing over and over again. And so it just felt, you know, different. There were some ways I was able to be a more authentic version of myself that were, that still allowed me to align with like political goals. And so like, for example, one thing that's really important to me is educating folks about how do we come together in politics. I think we need good Republicans and good Democrats in office. Like, I don't think the goal is to have like your own party as like this, you know, overtaking, right? Because we want the balance of ideas and perspectives, and parties change over time. And sometimes one party gets a little off course and the other party can help course correct a little bit and pull them back, you know. And so I think that like having some of the back and forth, but I think the primary goal is to get good people in there, right? Like good, honest people who are in there for the right reasons and not because they have money and power behind them, you know, like, and that's where we can have good conversations and make good policies. And so one of the things that I did was after I gave my stump speech, I would also share about some of the psychological aspects of how do we talk to our friends and neighbors who have different political beliefs than us, because it's so hard in this day and age for people to bring up politics and not have it get gross really fast. And so really I was just like arming people with tools on how to have those conversations. That's something I had really focused on in my grad school studies. And so, you know, educating folks. And I think that was a really fun part of my campaign, and because it's not something politicians often talk about, but I just think you can get really fired up hearing a political speech, but on Monday morning, that emotional high is gone, and you're back at work or wherever you are, and the emotional high is gone. But if I educated you, if I gave you some tools for your tool belt so that on Monday morning, even if you don't have the emotional high, you have tools to talk to your friends and neighbors, well, that felt like it was something that was very authentically me. And something I appreciated about my team on the ground is that they made space for me to be authentically me. And they did say, okay, these are some of the things we just kind of have to do because you're a politician, but then these are some ways that you get to be more authentically you. A couple of the mistakes that I made, first of all, I think I had at this point in my life too much going on to have the capacity to run a federal campaign. And I will own that. Like, I think there was just too much in my life at that time. The second thing is that I didn't trust myself enough. I didn't listen to my intuition at times when it would have been really important to do that. And so, as some of you may have seen in the news, or feel free to Google after this, but my campaign manager did something unethical about a month before the end of the campaign without my knowledge of like exactly what was going. So he had mentioned a little piece of something, but it wasn't he had mentioned a little something, but it wasn't, he wasn't sharing it with me honestly, what he was doing. And there was something about what he said that just was like, something inside me was like, this doesn't quite feel right. But again, like, I'm like, he's been in politics for a decade, and he was working with a coalition, a PAC, and the leader of that PAC was also like, oh no, this is fine, this is good. And so I was like, okay, these two men who have been in politics for decades are both saying like that, this is okay. And I knew very little of what was actually happening. And turns out he was doing much more things and different things than what he had shared that were unethical. And it landed in the news and everywhere I looked, right? Is social media, the paper, the people talking, like within my circles. And it felt like, oh my gosh, the whole world is judging me right now. When it was, obviously it was a smaller percentage of people who are actually like paying attention to, political news at a primary race. But if I would have listened to my intuition, now I'm not saying it's my fault that this happened. Like, I'll own the pieces I need to own, but I will hold him responsible for the actions that he took, right? And so I want to make that distinction because sometimes as women, we take responsibility for the actions of others, the wrongful actions of others. So I want to like say, I'll own my contribution, but he took the actions. And so, but I do wish that I would have like asked a few more questions. But then I've also met with politicians that are like, you can't possibly oversee every decision and thing that's happening within your campaign, especially at a federal level, because there's so many moving pieces constantly, right? And so that's where, and then one of the men involved had said, this is okay. Yeah, this is fine. And then turned around and reported it to the campaign ethics committee and filed criminal charges and all of these very extreme measures. And so I also learned like, especially at a federal level, but I can't speak to a local level, but just being careful who you trust. If they're, it's hard. Like I know you go in with a lens of trust, Sarah. Maybe I'm jaded because of what happened. But I also met with, but prior to running, right before I made the decision, I met with a very powerful man in my party, in my state, who was, I thought, a friend of mine. And, he said, there's this other candidate coming into the primary. He's moving from DC. He's got, power, and he's got some establishment power and some money. I didn't know the extent to which he had it, but I knew he was moving back. And he said, he's like, I don't think this is the time for you to run because I think it'll be hard for you to go up for him. And he said, it could ruin, he said, I will probably see it ruining your political career. But at the end of the meeting, he said, but you should do what you want to do. Well, I met with this individual and I was like, I'm not sure his story is compelling. And I'm not sure that he could be successful in a general election. And so I've got this support. I've got this, free campaign manager. I'm going to go ahead and throw my hat in the ring. Well, that person that I had met with prior to running, it was not actually a warning, a prediction. It was actually like, this is what I'm going to do to you. So I'm going to take actions to ensure that you fail. So throughout the campaign, there was harassment, sexual harassment, bullying, intimidation, harassing my donors. It was so extreme. It was happening every week. I was getting calls from people. I was experiencing it personally. He was investigating my nonprofit to try to find something we were doing wrong. I mean, he just came on full force to actively try to sabotage my campaign. And this is someone I thought was a friend and who in social media seems to be a very positive person. So I was really thrown off by that. He was involved in he got involved with this ethics thing too, I believe, and was kind of like leveraging it, right, to help me lose the race. So for me now, like if I ever ran for office again, I think I would probably go in like not trusting people as much until they earn my trust. Aside from the people that were faithful with me, through, the campaign, like those people I trust, right? They stuck with me and helped me get through the mess because I ended up having to fire my campaign manager 3 weeks before the election, which is wild. So I became my own campaign manager. If you look at my social media, because he did my social media, he's very gifted creatively, you can see exactly you could see exactly where he left. I had a few things in
I'm
the docket, but you can see the downfall of the graphics. But anyway, so for me, I guess I'm a little less trusting in politics. I also assumed that general elections were the worst, but I've since learned that primary elections are actually more nasty sometimes. And I think it's because you don't know who your enemy, like I'm saying enemies, and I don't like that word, but you don't know who your enemies are. You go into a room and speak, and you think, oh, this is my party, these are my supporters. In a general election, that would be the case, but in a primary, that's not always the that's not always the case. So it was a really hard lesson to learn, very expensive. I've spent thousands of dollars on legal fees for something I didn't even do. It threatened my ability to take the bar exam, and so I took it in February, thankfully, but I had to go before a panel. I mean, it has
Melissa.
turned my life upside down.
Oh my gosh, that's such a big story, but I think something to take away from that is that you survived it and here you are. Um,
Survived, yes, yes, I will say
yes,
clearly, yes.
we have a couple of really good audience questions that I want to get to. I'm going to kind of mash them all together into something topical. So first, I'm just going to say, what advice do you have for future candidates? And there was a few questions about how much experience people need before they're running. So can kind of talk about both of those things. And this time we'll start with Melissa and end with Sarah.
You sure you want more of me right now? I'm just unloaded. I would say if I were to do it again, I do see a lot of value in running for something local, first, or just something state level, and just kind of getting some experience and understanding how, campaign works. But I will say, as a woman, the expectations are different. Like my opponent and I would go to speak, and he had never run for office either. And during the Q&A, they would always ask me why I thought I should run for a federal office when I never ran for office before. And my opponent standing right there and never got asked that question. So the rules are different for women, for sure. But yes, I do think there's value in starting smaller and learning how it works. And honestly, local politicians are they're the ones that really make a big difference. A federal level, it's not the same. You can't have the same impact. So even though there's not as I think the local level politics are really where a lot of the really important things are happening anyway. So was there something else you wanted me to answer, Dr. Johnson?
We'll come back to it if I think you did it.
Okay, I couldn't remember if there was a second question or not. So okay.
And I would just say that if you have the opportunity to run at a local level, it will really help refine you. It's like the practice before the big game. You'll really hone in on how to door knock, how to stand up for yourself, what your stump speech is. I mean, even things like understanding at every door, everybody is recording you from the moment you walk up to that Ring doorbell camera to the moment you walk away. And what you say before, during, and after can all end up on social media. These are just things you have to learn and experience. You also need to learn. I will never forget my very first time door knocking, and my husband was in the car at street. I was at a ranch brick house in the city, very nice neighborhood. I knocked on the door. The guy was asking me questions, and he said, okay, well, I need to know where you stand on every position. So what's your favorite sex position? And I said, this conversation is over. And he was like, oh, come on, doll. I'm not going to vote for you if you don't answer. And I said, you're not going to vote for me anyway. And I walked away. And I was terrified in that moment, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And oh my gosh, am I saying the right thing? And I was glad that that's what I said. But you need those experiences because you never know what's going to come at you. And it will prepare you for those bigger races. Even if you do it once and you know you're not going to win, if you do it for the experience, you will have gained so much knowledge, but you will also, if you win, have the opportunity to learn on so many different policies that you will have never been able to touch otherwise. It might make you an expert on a topic that propels you to the next seat.
Mhm.
I'm very flattered that I'm constantly asked to run for the state house, and I do not want to, because we can do 150 things in a year and say we're going to do 150 things and do 160. Like, that's the beauty of local level. I can't see that happening at state level, but I have spent 12 years working on property taxes, and it is a super complicated topic. I now get calls from all over the state when bills are coming forward on this, and I'm very vocal about the impacts when changes are being made, good or bad. And so I would have never had to learn that if certain things hadn't been going on and without this opportunity. So you never know what policy or what passion point you might get at a local level that you would have never had otherwise. And it can just keep moving you up.
Mhm. Yeah.
I,
I think what you were saying too, Sarah, like that, and I'm being super direct with you here because we don't have much time, so I'm just like giving it to you. And I think that's what, it's you need to go in wide, eyes wide open, whether you're a candidate and you're gonna have to deal with this firsthand, or you're on the team, to know what it's like for your candidates, because it is rampant. The sexual harassment is rampant. I had stalkers. I had men showing up and writing me poems, like gross poem. Like I had, there's a couple of porn sites that were made with my campaign pictures made into memes and inappropriate comment. Like it's constant. The comments on, on social media, obviously I didn't, like Sarah, I just avoided reading them for the most part, but the inappropriate comments, about your body, and it's just something as women that you'll just have to deal with in significantly greater amounts if you go in expecting it and having support on your team and knowing and kind of putting up a guard wall so that you don't internalize those comments. Those are helpful ways to kind of get ahead of it.
I really appreciate, I study sexual harassment professionally. That sounded wrong. Y'all understand.
I get it. Yeah.
And I love the idea as making part of a team, be ready to help you deal with that kind of thing. So thank you for that advice that I didn't even think to ask about. Our time is up. Thank you both so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. And I look forward to working with you again, hopefully. We're still working on getting you a co-hostship, but I want to give you enough time to talk because people are going to have good questions for you.
Sure.
So do you mind just starting by introducing yourself, and then as soon as we can get your slides up, we will?
Perfect. Sounds good. Yeah, my name is Blake Hansen. I'm an attorney at the Dickinson Bradshaw Law Firm in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm on the advisory board for the Ready to Run program and have been for at least 8 years, it seems like, maybe longer. And what I'm going to talk about generally is Iowa election law. I've had some involvement in my practice. A lot of what I do is litigation work, dealing with personal injury, wrongful death, defense of those sorts of claims, really anything somebody could be sued for. But one of the other kind of niche areas I do, along with responding to certain administrative complaints and professional licensure issues, is election law. And I graduated from Iowa State University, majored in political science, and was heavily involved in politics, both in college and then law school. And then I have tried, as time permits, to continue being involved. So I've had the opportunity, and when we talk about some of these instances, to be involved kind of firsthand as it relates to some of these election law disputes. And we'll go through those when we talk, but that's going to be the topic of my discussion.
We are ready for your slides now.
Perfect. All right, let's see if I can get this here. All right. Okay. We all good? All right. So I presented it wasn't last year, last time this program was run, same title. My firm name has slightly changed, so I made that update, and I've included a couple other additional election law issues that have kind of sprung up since then. And so we'll go through those. Generally, laws, rules, and regulations. So you got Iowa Code chapters here, and we aren't going to go through these really at all. I just want to provide them to you just as a basis, so you know there are a variety of chapters in the Iowa Code that relate to election law. You see a brief summary there. That's not all of them. That's probably a snapshot that may more directly apply to you. But that's an example. So in terms of kind of the regulating bodies, you have the Iowa Code and all those provisions. Then you have the Iowa Ethics and Campaign Disclosure Board. And they kind of serve as the policing entity for enforcing certain regulations regarding campaign ethics, rules, and laws regarding candidates, elected officials, political action committees, those sorts of things. And then you have the Federal Election Commission, which really is more applicable if you're running for federal office or operating a federal PAC or some sort of entity that's donating or making donations on behalf of a federal candidate. We're not going to go over any of that, but really the focus is going to be applying some of this stuff and seeing here in Iowa specifically what's happened over the past, handful of years. And so we call it election law in action. Before we go through these examples, I just want to let you know, for the most part, none of this stuff happens, right? These are pretty rare scenarios and instances when I would become involved as an attorney or get involved, are fairly few and far between. With that being said, though, you want to be mindful of these examples because in certain instances they can come into play. And within the past, I'd say at least 10 years, this process, specifically the nominating petition process that we'll talk about, I think has really been weaponized on both sides, in that you have people who are no doubt, if your race is contested or a notable race in the spotlight, they are going to manually look through your nominating petition and seek to find ways to undercut your petition so you don't have ballot access to begin with. And they will file objections. Some of them have more merit than others, and in an attempt to just get you off the ballot. So a lot of the focus is going to be on just ballot access because that's the most important part, right? You can't get elected if you're not on the ballot. And then we'll talk about some of the other issues that have arisen, after that as it relates to elections. So this is going to be the first example, nominating petition requirement. And this is in a partisan race. And you'll see here the total number of signatures must equal at least 1% of the votes cast in Congressional District 3 for the party's candidate for president in the last general election, rounded up to the next whole number. Before I get too far, this is 2018. It's kind of setting the stage here. 2018, David Young is the incumbent congressman in Iowa, 3rd Congressional District, which includes Des Moines. You have a highly contested Democratic primary. You have Pete D'Alessandro, who was real big in Bernie Sanders' election. He's running. You have Eddie Mauro, who's a candidate. He's running. You have Cindy Axne, who was running. And you have Teresa Greenfield, who was also a candidate, who was running and was really looked at as kind of the front runner. She had a lot of support from the DCCC, a lot of support from the Democratic National Committee. And so that just kind of sets the backdrop here. And so what you see here is what the requirement was to get on the ballot in the Democratic primary. That's what you had to fulfill. Democratic candidate in the 3rd district must gather at least 1,790 valid signatures, including a minimum number of signatures in at least 8 counties. Seems fair enough, right? A lot of people would have their campaign manager do this sort of work. Sometimes it's outsourced to another entity. Ultimately, though, the candidate's responsible for it. Well, what happened? So Teresa Greenfield, who was the front runner, last night my campaign manager notified me that he had forged signatures on my petition. And this is, as an example, one I was personally involved in. So what do you do with that information? Last night would have been March 15th. The deadline was, I believe it was end of business on the 16th. So you had two options. One, I guess you could not say anything. To me, that's problematic for a number of reasons, right? I question your integrity, I question your morals, and who knows, maybe it doesn't get caught, right? Maybe nobody thinks a thing of it. The second option you can take is you got to own up to it and see what you can do to fix it. And that's the option she took. So what happened? So she withdrew her nominating petition that had been filed, and she essentially had to start over in however long it was, 24-hour period, and try and get as many signatures as she could. And to her credit, I mean, they had people all over the third district. Union organizers were heavily involved. I mean, it was an impressive spur of the moment effort. And ultimately, she entered the Lucas building, which is where the Secretary of State's office is, at 4:53 p.m. She signed the paperwork at 4:59 p.m. Had it stamped by a state official at 5 p.m. That's about as close as you can possibly get to submitting your nominating petition. Ultimately, she had 1,592 signatures, 198 signatures under the requirement. Very sad for all involved. A lot of Democrats very upset, myself included. Not enough signatures. So she's off the ballot. Or is she off the ballot? This is where some creativity may come into play from your legal counsel if you take that route. So Iowa Code Section 43.24 governs the death or withdrawal of a primary candidate. And it says this: if a person who has filed nomination papers with the state commissioner, all right, she's filed nomination papers, dies or withdraws up to the 76th day before the primary election. Okay, so she's filed, she could withdraw them, hasn't yet. The appropriate convention or central committee of that person's party may designate one additional primary election candidate. Okay, so how does that work? Ultimately, what she did was she withdrew the deficient nominating petition she had filed and argued that under 43.24, since she had filed the petition, she withdrew the petition, the third district Democratic State Central Committee is now empowered to designate a candidate to fulfill that position. And the idea would be that they could designate her to fill that position. There was not, I mean, no case law in terms of this provision ever really being used. Certainly not in this scenario that we're talking about. But ultimately, that was the question. Does this apply here? There was a debate within the Central Committee whether or not they could even invoke this. Dueling legal opinions, myself on behalf of Teresa Greenfield, and then all the other campaigns who, of course, did not want her to be on the ballot. Ultimately, the third district invoked the law and they voted to add her on the ballot under 43.24. All right, now what? Craig Robinson brought a complaint against the nominating petition. And it wasn't really so much based upon her invoking that status, but based upon her prior nominating petition that had been filed. Regardless, arguments were made, and you see there the nominating, the panel, the objection panel, which includes the auditor, secretary of state, and attorney general. Those are the three statewide elected officials that kind of serve as the judges when you're dealing with these sort of nominating petition disputes. Secretary Pate, at the end of that hearing, said he felt he had no choice. He was going to certify her to be on the ballot because he was still waiting for guidance from the attorney general, who had not provided any guidance to him. So we felt pretty good about that. Maybe we're out of the woods, but we weren't. So the next day, the Iowa Attorney General stated that Chapter 43 of the Iowa Code does not permit the candidate to be designated as an additional primary election candidate. And with that opinion in hand, Secretary of State Paul Pate declined to certify the candidate for the ballot. So ultimately, she was off the ballot. Now, had she wanted to, she could have challenged that in district court. And depending upon the outcome of that, she could have appealed that to the Iowa Supreme Court. But obviously, there are a variety of reasons why you may want to do that, and why you may not want to do that. She ultimately was the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate, I think a few years later. But that ended her congressional run. And ultimately, we know a Democrat did win and was successful, and that was Cindy Axne. So fast forward. U.S. Senate candidate Abby Finkenauer will appear on primary ballot, Iowa Supreme Court rules. Another nominating petition issue years later, dealing with sufficiency of signatures. U.S. Senate candidates were required to have a certain number of signatures. Here, the question wasn't so much the total number of signatures, but did you have enough signatures in each county? And so best practices here is to always get more signatures than you need, right? Because if you have somebody with the pencil going through and saying, you don't have a date here, you don't have an address here, that signature isn't legible, ultimately you can afford to lose some of those signatures and still be fine. Here, the issue was some of the signatures did not have a date next to them. One had an incorrect date, one had no date, and the third wrote their zip code rather than the date. Issue here is if all of those signatures were invalidated, she would still have 3,500 signatures, but she wouldn't have enough in each of the 19 counties to be able to be on the petition. And, this was similar to the Greenfield matter. This went to the objection panel, then it went to the district court, and then it went to the Iowa Supreme Court, who was ultimately tasked with deciding whether or not Abby Finkenauer could be on the ballot. And really, there was some conflicting language. The Republicans were focused on the language that said each signer shall, which in Iowa law means must, add the date of the signing. They took that to mean if you have a signature and there's not the date of signing, it doesn't count. There was a more recent provision in the election law that made it appear as if that would not be a requirement, but those were the two conflicting provisions. And you see what the Iowa Supreme Court did here. Neither side's position is without flaws. There was some difficulty on both sides, but statutory interpretation is not like proving math problems. It's sometimes difficult to come up with a neat answer that's intellectually satisfying. But in the end, we believe we must be guided by the legislature's last word on the subject, which was the provision that the Democrats were focusing on. So she ultimately, was able to be on the ballot. But just another scenario as to why you have to be so careful and ensure you have sufficient signatures. All right. Another nomination dispute. Switching gears a little bit here. This was dealing, I believe in 2016, if you remember, Kanye West had a short-lived candidacy for president of the United States. And the dispute was, does his Republican affiliation in his home state of Wyoming interfere with his ability to run as an independent in the state of Iowa? There's a challenger that said he was required to identify as a Republican and he hadn't done so. However, the issue was the chapter that was being referred to as Chapter 43, which deals with partisan nominations. Here, this wasn't a partisan nomination because he was running as an independent. So the result was Kanye was allowed to be on the ballot in Iowa. So just to juxtapose, you got Teresa Greenfield's situation, not allowed to be on the ballot. And then, of course, Mr. West or Ye or whatever his name is now, allowed to be on the ballot for president of the United States. Here's another one. Infamous crime. What's an infamous crime? So this dealt with a contested state Senate Democratic primary regarding Ned Chido and Tony Bisignano. One candidate filed an objection to the nomination saying that Mr. Bisignano was disqualified from holding public office based on his prior conviction of an OWI second offense. And that since they felt that was an infamous crime such that it prohibited him from being on the ballot for public office in Iowa. That was the question. Again, went through that objection panel, went to the district court and ultimately to the Iowa Supreme Court. Ultimately, the Iowa Supreme Court said, it's not aligned in any way with the crimes that the legislature back in the 1800s determined were infamous. It's a misdemeanor crime. It's a crime that does not require specific criminal intent and lacks a nexus to preserving the integrity of the election process. So he was ultimately allowed to be on the ballot. Here's another one. Iowa House District 55. Candidate narrowly loses race by 9 votes, and this was in 2019. Of the 33 mail-in ballots that arrived after the November 6 election, postal officials examining barcodes determined that 29 of those 33 had been mailed in time to be counted. But the envelopes did not have postmarks. The Postal Service reviewed its data to show when they were mailed. Iowa law had a requirement that you use an intelligent barcode to make that determination, but that term was undefined. And so is a timestamp used to date the ballot sufficient under Iowa law to prove they were mailed in time and thus can be counted? District Court, the grounds asserted by the plaintiff to count the ballots fall within the parameters of Iowa Code 57.1, and the matter should be left to the legislative branch. So that's what we call a punt. They essentially said the House is responsible under Iowa law to have its own hearing and make its own determination on the matter. And so that's exactly what happened. And of course, all of the votes were along party lines. And given that Republicans had the edge, they had more votes, and those ballots were not counted. And that was the challenge. So then you had Representative Bergen, who ultimately was the winner. Absentee ballot requests. This was a few years back. This is another one I was involved in. I defended the Johnson County auditor. And this is when President Trump's campaign, the Republican National Committee, sued these 3 county auditors. They had pre-filled in the forms that included the ID numbers and then mailed them out to voters. And the directive from Secretary Paul Pate was that you cannot pre-fill anything. And these county auditors felt that it was within their powers to pre-fill in those pieces of information, and that the directive from Secretary Pate was not a law, and to the extent it was, his directive infringed upon their own powers as local elected officials. What happened? Just went over that. We just went over that. The result was pretty uniform. All of those county auditors lost handily. The district court in each of those instances granted the injunction that was sought by the Trump campaign, the Republican National Committee, which invalidated tens of thousands of ballots that had already previously been sent out, which required new ballots to be sent out, and presumably, some lost votes, assuming some people didn't refill out those ballots or go to the ballot box. I think this is the last one we have here. So this is much more recent, the most recent. Last year, if you remember that Libertarian Party issue that happened regarding some of their congressional candidates and the method in which they were elected at their own convention. A lot of the dispute here was, it involved everybody. The Libertarians obviously wanted to be on the ballot. You had the Democrats who wanted them to be on the ballot because of the belief that they would draw votes away from Republicans, or more specifically, Donald Trump. And then you had some Republicans who didn't want them on the ballot for that same belief. So you had people from all over the board weighing in on the law here and what they felt should happen. So instead of choosing the candidates in the June party primaries, the 3 congressional candidates for the Libertarian Party were nominated at the state convention by delegates elected at that convention. 6 eligible voters in those 3 districts filed formal objections, claiming the party failed to properly follow the procedure outlined in Iowa Code 43.94. The code says that the county convention delegates' terms of office do not begin until the day following their election at a precinct caucus. What's the issue here? Well, the Libertarians held the caucuses and county conventions on the same day. Theory being, their nominations didn't count because their terms weren't effective until the next day. And as such, they didn't follow Iowa law and the requirements for nominating. And similar to these other instances, objections went before the objection panel, went to the district court, and ultimately to the Iowa Supreme Court. And you see kind of how it played out there. We are not persuaded that strict compliance is fundamentally unfair. They could have qualified for the general election ballot by filing nomination petitions with signatures like the other political party candidates. They did not do that. They relied on an alternative procedure that's afforded by Iowa law. Having done so, they had to be in compliance with that procedure. In some, like the district court, we find strict compliance was required. The Libertarian Party did not comply. So ultimately, they were not on the ballot for that reason. I mean, going way back to the convention, because someone made the decision, well, let's just do it all now. I'm sure it was convenient. It was probably cheaper and much more efficient. But as I said, when some of these races can get, when they think that there's going to be a role in a presidential race or it's going to have some outsized impact on another race, you're going to have all parties from all sides looking at this to see what they can do to ensure it favors them. And that's what happened here. So lesson learned, hopefully, for the Libertarian Party. So what does this mean? Following the rules the first time is much easier than seeking judicial relief after the fact. And for the most part, that's what happens. People follow the rules the first time. The Iowa Secretary of State's office has a great summary of some of these rules and a candidate kind of cheat sheet that you can use for deadlines and all sorts of things that if you adhere to them, you're generally good. But these instances, were scenarios where they were not adhered to, they were caught and then litigated, whether that be with the state objection panel or whether that be with the district court or whether that be ultimately with the Iowa Supreme Court. So given that, any questions or follow-ups regarding maybe any of these specific scenarios or questions you might have as you're contemplating, potentially running for office? I'm happy to answer.
We got one question in the chat, just clarifying a point
Sure.
you made. So if a signature is fraudulent, that invalidates the whole petition, but if a signature is just incomplete, you can cross it out. Is that correct?
Certainly, if the signature is fraudulent, yes, that would invalidate that signature. The issue with the Teresa Greenfield campaign is that it wasn't just like the campaign manager said, I forged one signature. We were talking about a significant amount of signatures, some unknown whether or not they were or not. So she had to start from ground one. But yeah, in real time, when you're getting these signatures, and if you have somebody who fills it out and maybe there's an issue, if you cross that out and they put in the updated information or the missing information and it's before the deadline and it's before you're submitting it, then yeah, that's certainly fine. And I think you see that often, especially when there are requirements for a ton of signatures, like in a congressional race.
Okay, so we had a question. You covered the nomination code. Are there notable examples you can think of from the campaign finance codes?
So that would be 68A in the Iowa Code dealing with campaign finance rules and procedures. The thing that I can think of there is that would probably be most directly relevant to somebody considering running for office, certainly as a first-time candidate, is the thresholds in terms of raising money. If you raise, and it may be dependent upon race, what race you're running in, could be as low as $500, but there's a threshold where you have to have your campaign committee registered with the state once you hit a certain number in terms of donations. So that's going to be probably the first thing you're going to deal with in terms of campaign finance. Most of your campaigns, you have a treasurer, and that's somebody you note in your paperwork when you're filing. If you're running with one of the two major parties, right, Democrats or Republicans, they have people who do this work. A lot of them do it for more than one candidate. And they're going to be pros and they're going to know all the ins and outs of this. So get a good treasurer, somebody who's done it before in the past. If you can, ask them whether or not they've done it before in the past, how often they've done it. But yeah, compliance with 68A is important. I think prior to my discussion, I think I caught the tail end of Sarah and Melissa's experiences. They were talking about their campaigns, and I was involved with Melissa related to that campaign finance issue that she had discussed that got brought up in the midst of that campaign. So that was dealing with a political action committee and campaign, donations. So that's a scenario, 68A and B where that could come into play. That's also one of the primary areas that the Campaign Ethics and Disclosure Board kind of polices. So be mindful of that. But in terms of, real world examples governing that, I would say the Melissa Vine example that she just told you about before would be an example of a campaign issue arising out of campaign finance rules. And then a specific one to be aware of if you are going to run is what that minimum threshold is to ensure that you have your candidate committee, fully registered with the state, before you start taking in those funds.
Nice. And we will be having the Iowa campaign rules, finance and regulation coming later today, just for the
perfect
participants to know that.
Yeah, you'll get all the details there.
Right? But it's good to hear from both sides.
Yeah.
Where can we find out the number of petition signatures needed for different offices like city council versus federal offices?
Yep. So the signature threshold, it should be, let's see here. Let's see if I included kind of the municipal code. but it was part of the chapter 45 for sure. And I don't see, there should be another chapter or section that would apply for running for county or municipal offices. That's generally where you're going to see that type of information and what requirements, if any, there are if you are going to run for like city council. I don't see that any of those chapters that I included have that, but generally, you're looking at Iowa Code chapters 43, to 49. And somewhere in there you're gonna find it, and the headline will be clear. It'll say, municipal offices or county offices, and then that should have your info.
Okay, so another comment in the chat is follow the rules sounds easy, but there are times when people are totally surprised to figure out that they hadn't been following all of them. Do you have any suggestions about how to address this?
Yeah, so I think one would be do your due diligence at the front end. It's impossible as a candidate, certainly if you're running for a larger office, to police every single thing that every single person on your team does, right? So there's a fair amount of trust that you have to have in your team because you're busy doing other things, right? You're going to forums, you're trying to raise money, all sorts of work. And then, you have your real life as well when you're running for office. So I would ensure that your campaign manager that you have is somebody that you think is trustworthy, somebody who has done this before, not saying that somebody who hasn't can't do it, but it certainly if you're going to run for some of these larger offices, I think you want somebody who's done this before and has a history of doing it. One of the other concerns is, making sure you have enough people on your team. I think one issue in that Greenfield scenario is that I think that campaign manager, I think it was one of those things where he felt he was doing too much. He didn't have enough time. She easily could have gotten all the signatures she needed. He felt he didn't have enough time to do it. And so he just made the decision that he'll just handwrite some names in and it wouldn't be that big of a deal until, his conscience got the better of him and then he fessed up to it toward the end. So due diligence on your team, make sure you have a team, make sure the responsibilities of that team are clear, make sure you're checking in with members of your team on a regular basis and foster an environment where, if there are issues, they can bring them to you. Where if they're like, I don't know where I'm going to find the time. I don't think we're going to have enough time to get these signatures. That kind of information certainly would have been more helpful, days, weeks, months prior to the deadline than it is, the day before. So, those generally would be best practices. I agree. Everyone assumes they're following the rules, but just make sure you're doing your own due diligence as well in terms of checking in with your team, asking questions. And if you're not satisfied with the answers, asking follow-up questions. And if you're not satisfied with that, escalating it accordingly.
As a follow-up to that, what should your first steps be if you figure out that you have been doing something incorrectly? What first steps do you do to ethically figure that out?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it comes to your attention that you have been doing something incorrectly, it depends. You may talk to other members of your team, depending upon how your team is organized. Depending upon who it is that did it, you want to talk to your campaign manager. Certainly, if you come into that scenario, that's one where you may want to engage legal counsel. What you don't want to do is ignore it. And certainly once you become aware of it, that's an issue because now you are aware of it. You can't backtrack that, right? You can't pretend that you don't know or that person didn't tell you. So you certainly want to make sure you're making morally right, ethical decisions and reporting it, kind of like what happened in the Greenfield scenario. And, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world. There are ways to fix things. And if there aren't, there are creative ways you can try to fix things, which may or may not work, but there's other options. But you don't know what those options are unless you report it and you talk to people who may be able to provide you with, their advice or guidance as to what the best next steps might be.
Thank you so much, Blake, for coming today. And for everybody else, we will reconvene at 1 p.m. Oh yeah, this is thank yous coming in at the chat now. And thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.